on the capital improvements that are associated with the departments that we're looking at tonight. So you have all of the information, which also includes the fire and police, but I would like to reserve any discussion about those capital budgets until we have the two chiefs on at the next budget session, since they'll be able to best speak to some of the items on there. So the first thing that we've got, as I scroll through, is our 2020 amended budget. So as it stands with the changes that are on the agenda tonight, our 2020 amended budget without carryover encumbrances is $8,358,795. So that's a very large number. The budgets have been typically in the upper $6 million range. But of course, we had a number of different things happen this year, which really contributed to that. We had the North Bellevue repair that was included in this, as well as our coronavirus relief funds. So those two things were almost $1 million worth of expenditures that were not planned on their own. So that's part of the reason why our 2020 budget is such a high figure. So when we look at 2021 and comparing to 2020, it's going to be a little more difficult, because we're going to have to extrapolate some of those things out in order to make sense, because those things really were anomalies for the year. So that's our amended budget, and it has it all broken down, all the different funds, and then all the major spending categories here. And then if we look at our 2020 estimate, again, it's broken down in all of the same ways as the previous slide. So we've got all of our different funds and all the different major spending categories. And even though our appropriations for 2020 are at 8.3 million, we're on track to spend about 7.7 million. Now, the North Bellevue project, we haven't gotten the final invoice from that yet. But that's just assuming through the end of September that we're going to keep spending like we have spent. I've went over all of the estimates and the projections for 2020's year end with all of the department heads. So feel pretty good about this estimate as it stands right now. So it's not quite as much as what has been approved, but of course, that's always the plan, is to have more budget approved than what you need so that you are within your legal limits. So looking ahead at 2021, again, formatted very similarly in that we've got the different funds and the different spending categories. And our 2021 budget, as it stands right now, all funds will be $7,480,465. So just to put that into perspective, if we took out the North Bellevue situation and we took out the coronavirus relief funds, our 2020 budget originally was $7,146,950. So that's a difference between 2020 to 2021 of $333,515. So that's a 4.6% increase from 2020 to 2021. So I used that original budget figure from 2020 just because that was before the North Bellevue situation and the coronavirus relief funds were all put in. So that's more of an apples to apples comparison of budget. So we're going to go through the different departments now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the highlights of each fund, and I'll get into some specifics. And then before I move on to the next fund, I'll ask if anybody has any questions, and we will we'll go from there so that we're not having to circle back around and holding questions until the end. I'd rather go fund by fund. So when we look at the general fund, It's right now, it's a balanced budget as it's presented. So we're looking at if 2020 is estimated to end where I think it's going to end, then we would walk into 2021 with a beginning fund balance of $1,788 or $88,235. So our revenues are relatively flat. So I've got in the blue, I've got our 2020 budget, and green, I've got our proposed 2021 budget. So our revenues are relatively flat, and we've got a total revenue just slightly higher projected than what 2020's budget was, which is $1,067,617. So we all know that there were property tax reevaluations. Everybody got the letters from the auditor, but none of those revenues will be realized until 2022. So 2021 does not take any of that stuff into consideration. So the auditor will give us our 2022 estimations in June or July of the coming year, and that will let us know what 2022 is going to look like. So just keep in mind that those property tax reevaluations, they'll affect our inside millage, not our outside millage levies that we have, just our inside millage. So we will see some increases, but not until 2022. So this is a nice kind of roll up. Our general fund is divided into different departments: legislative, administrative, library, museum, community environment, which is planning and zoning, and then transfers out to other funds. So this one page right here is a really nice snapshot because it shows our total revenue, and then it's got all of our different departments, and then it's got our total expenses. So basically we're set to go into reserves by $60. So to me, that's a very balanced budget. So the way that I budget is it's typically pretty conservative. I tend to overstate our expenses just a little, and I'm pretty conservative on our revenues. Now, our property tax receiving funds, such as the general fund, those are pretty set dollars that we get. So the Greene County Auditor gives us our estimation of property taxes, like I said, at the midpoint in the year that we use for these. So there's not really a whole lot of wiggle room, but we did this year, as I had advised council before, receive more property tax dollars than what the auditor had projected. So sometimes there are some extra revenues that come. So those numbers, those projections from the auditor aren't hard, fast numbers necessarily. So if we take a look at the blue this year, I thought that with the budget, we were going to add $93,000 to our reserves, and we ended up adding $171,000 to our reserves. So that's building our reserves, which is always a good thing in case we ever need it. As we saw, we had the North Bellevue situation happen, and thankfully, we were able to get that grant, but we do have pretty good reserves in case of an emergency, and we would ever need to tap into them. So again, this is a pretty balanced budget. I look for this number to add to reserves versus taking the $60 away. So I'm just going to go through some of the different departments, and I'll hit on a couple of things. One thing before we move into expenses, Maverma, this is our insurance pool. So each year we typically get a refund when a loss year is closed. So after all claims are closed out from a year, then they'll reimburse us for anything that's left over from the premiums that we paid. They actually closed 2 loss years in 2020. This is only reflective of 1 loss year because we have not yet received the second allocation, but since we've got 2 years collected in 2020, we won't have any in 2021. So we'll go into the expenditures. So legislative, if you just take a look at these total numbers and kind of comparison, Typically, wages obviously go up, benefits are figured to go up. I use a 6% increase for our wage increases. That's not what our staff receive. Like this year, the wage increase was 2% for everybody, but we do have people that change what we call steps. So somebody might be at a step 2, and at their anniversary date, they would get a merit increase and move to, say, step 3. So I have to keep those kinds of increases budgeted into. So 6% has always been a safe number, and that's typically the increases that we've seen in the past. So when it comes to legislative, the clerk is allocated solely out of this budget. So if you look back at 2018, you can see where wages and compensation was quite a bit lower because we had Pam's position used to be clerk and accounts payable. So we did some restructuring in 2019. Actually, it might have been 2018 now, the end of 2018. But so we did some restructuring. So that's why you see some increases from 2018 with the wages. Other than that, everything is relatively flat. So conservatively budgeted again, and no real items to point out with legislative. So administrative, this pays a portion of quite a few people's wages. Myself, we've got 2 administrative assistants that are partially paid out of here. We've got a couple of different positions that come out of this one. So when we look at the admin budget, wages and compensation are pretty flat. You'll notice in 2018, these numbers were higher, and that's because we had a lot of higher paid people, and 2018 was where a lot of staff changes happened, myself coming on included in that year and losing the previous city manager. Benefits, relatively stable. One thing that I do want to point out, so these are our contract services. One thing that I will point out is our legal fees. We were budgeted at $10,000, which had kind of been in line with previous, and we're on track. We've actually spent $31,000 at this point. So there has been a lot going on that has required legal insight. So I think that if everybody kind of looks back at the year and some of the different things that have went on, we have some litigation that's currently ongoing. So I do have a breakdown of all of our legal costs by department, topic, by the month. So I do track all of that if anybody is ever interested in taking a deeper dive into that. But one thing that I will note is it's in our charter that we have to have our municipal attorney review every ordinance. So that does not come free. So just so that everybody knows that is in our charter. So I'm not sure how common that is in other charters, but it definitely is worth pointing out. So health district fees, this is all rolled up. There's a ton of stuff in our contract services. Our health district fees jumped up quite a bit, and that was a figure that was actually given to us by the health district. So other than that, this is from 2020 to 2021, it's pretty close with the exception of that increase in our legal services and a little bit in health district. And then there's a few things here and there that kind of contribute to that. Supplies and materials, just a small increase. We've done a lot of IT work, so I added a little bit to that and some miscellaneous supplies too. So total administrative expenses, this also includes our transfers out. So 2020, we had $425,000 in transfers out. And obviously, if you look at this 2020 actuals, that number, that 772,600 is a direct result of the North Bellevue bridge. So what we did was we took general fund revenues, we transferred them out to our capital fund, and that's where the repairs were paid for from. So the North Bellevue expenses actually get tracked twice. So it's a transfer out from the general fund, and then it gets expensed out in the capital improvement fund. So it gets calculated twice in our bottom line but we will be receiving back into the general fund the grant money that we got from Ohio Public Works Commission. So as you can see, this really had a big effect on our bottom line with our transfers. So for 2021, our transfers out that we will need will be $550,000. So that is going to be an extra $125,000 over last year. And it's going to be an additional 25K to fire and an additional 100K more out to capital. And we'll go over all of those. In future budgets here.
You say 100, how much extra to fire?
It was 25 extra to fire and 100 more to capital.
Okay.
And we can look at our capital because we've got some pretty decent reserves in capital. So that could be negotiated a little bit. But as it stands right now, the general fund is at a balanced budget with the transfers out as they stand. So
yeah, I think I would like to talk about that in more detail when we get to the capital.
Yes. So our library, it's just small maintenance costs. We haven't spent hardly anything this year, but we also did some investment with the coronavirus relief funds too. So that's the exact same budget as it was in 2020. The museum, we have a part-time curator that works there. So those wages are pretty small just because she doesn't work a whole lot of hours. Some of the benefit costs are a little bit less for 2021. And then the rest of it really is just their utilities and a little bit of property maintenance. So we added another 1,000 to their property maintenance because I know that they wanted to do a couple of things over there. So other than that, I mean, the bottom line with the museum is an extra $1,000 from 2020 to 2021.
Is that property maintenance stuff? I know our service department does stuff over there. Is that over and above what they do?
So anytime that they have to buy any kind of supplies or anything, we put that under property maintenance. Like let's say they have to paint, that would go for the supplies that they would need to make that maintenance happen.
Okay.
So we might not necessarily pay a contractor, but anything that we would need to complete that work would come out of that line.
Okay.
So our community environment budget is our planning and zoning, basically. So this is Jessica. Part of her salary comes out of here. Not the whole thing is allocated here. So it's going to be a little less than the 2020 original budget. And we had some staff changes too. So if you all remember, we had Jeff Green and then we had Jessica come in. And so as a result of that, there is a little bit of savings with benefit designations and things like that. So so that's just a little bit less than what it was budgeted in 2020. We had a decrease in engineering fees. We just haven't needed, that department hasn't really needed engineers the way that they were budgeted. So that's budgeted lower. And then other than that, there's just a little bit more money for supplies just to kind of match what's been spent. So with community environment, that budget is actually less than what the 2020 budget was.
Hey, Melissa, I know that getting back to those legal fees, I know that a lot of those fees, if not most, were related to zoning issues, correct?
Correct.
So does it make sense, or can we even move some of those legal fees and have a line item in the zoning area? I mean, I just think from a standpoint from the community looking at it and saying, wow, you spent all that money in legal fees, it doesn't really tell them why. And
That's true.
I don't want the perception is that the city is getting sued all the time, because we're not. And they're specific to us trying to enforce existing zoning codes, which I think is explainable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can definitely add a legal services line. It's only been in administration, but I mean, I could add one to council, because every time an ordinance is reviewed, that should be tagged to council department.
Yeah.
Anytime.
It's because it's not a whole ton of money, But I don't know, maybe other council members think differently, but I just think it makes it clearer, especially since I think our legal expenses are probably going to go up related to zoning enforcement rather than down. Just my opinion. If we enforce what we say we're going to do.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a problem adding lines to different departments, like police, fire. They have legal expenses lines, so there's no reason that we couldn't put one in zoning or in council. So I can definitely do that.
Yep, that makes sense.
That's a good point, Nick. It does make it better for our citizens to see that some of this stuff we really don't have control. It's things that's built into just being a city. And I think that's a good point.
Melissa, I've got a quick question for you here.
Yeah.
The fringe benefits line on this page, estimated 19,000. If you scroll back down just a smidge, it looks like the wages and compensation is 36.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That it's lower?
Now that it's higher, like 36,000 going out in wages and 19,000 going out on fringe. Is it usually that high? I thought previous ones that percentage was different.
You mean previous budgets?
No, previous slides where you had fringe and wage.
You mean in relation to one another?
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to go up. So like this one's 93 and that's 47.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
your question was how they're in relation to one another?
Actually, that makes sense. So 93 and 47.
And then 36 and 19?
Yeah.
Okay. So does that answer your question, Ernie? Or you're just asking if that's a consistent split?
I thought so.
It just seems, the fringe seems high on this line item
It is high.
compared to the percentage on the other one. I don't know.
But it tracks when we compared it to the one before.
Okay.
Is that right? Does
Yeah.
that track to you now in comparison?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. You're welcome. Does
Watch.
anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have anything that they want to talk about in relation to the general fund before we move on? This is that roll up slide again. Okay. I'll take silence as an acknowledgement that we are ready to move on. Okay, so the next thing that we have are streets. So I am going to just go ahead and preface our streets fund with this one's a rough one to predict right now because especially on the revenue side. And the reason why is because the streets fund is basically funded by gas tax. So the gas taxes, we all know, have been a moving target, so to speak. So when we get our gas taxes, 92.5% of that goes to our streets fund and 7.5% of it goes to the state highway fund. So if we look, 2018, this number was quite a bit lower. And then it went up about $50,000 in 19. And then in 2020, it was set to jump quite a bit because there was an increase in the gas tax. Okay, so this was our original budget. This is where I think we're going to end up is this 368,000 out of the 413. And the reason that is, we all know, is because of the pandemic. Gas prices went really low. People weren't driving. So that had a pretty sizable effect on our gas tax. So even though we're ending 2020 still higher than what we ended 2019, we did not realize the full benefit of that additional gas tax. So I don't know what is going to happen in 2021. How long, we may see the effects of the reduced gas tax. I don't know when it could go back up to its full potential. So I'm trying to take a conservative estimate. Do I think that we're going to get more than this? I'm very hopeful of that, but as it stands for budgeting purposes, I'm not going to be too overzealous with that just because I just don't know. So gas taxes is really the main source of revenue from streets. And like I said, it's a moving target. It's something that's super hard to predict right now. So I'm projecting that our revenues are going to be lower than what our 2020 original budget is, just because we've got this big unknown that's the pandemic. So our reserves walking into 2020, I'm projecting we're going to have about 215,000 in reserves. So as you see, that's continued to build over the last couple of years, which is always a good thing. And I'm just going to go down to the roll up of the expenses. I do see that we're going to go in the red by about 40,000, but then again, I thought that we were going to only add, this shouldn't be red, this should actually be black, about 12,000 with the 2020 budget. We ended up adding 76,000, or we should end up adding about 76,000 by the year's end. So this 40,000, even though it's in the red, I'm not putting my bets on that's going to happen. I think that we'll probably end up adding to reserves a little bit. So I will note that we were down a person. We have been down a maintenance worker since February. So that was not something that we hired in because obviously, you know, the pandemic happened and we were, you know, really staggering schedules. So we did not hire on a person in the middle of all of that. So I've been talking to Ryan. We are set to advertise and hire for a position in November, so next month. So some of these, so it looks like this is a really low number where we're going to end 2020 in comparison to our 2021 budget. But you have to keep in mind that we were down a whole full-time position. And we were not working the same number of hours that we were when it comes to overtime and things like that. It's just really affected a lot of our staffing figures. So that plays a big part into the streets budget. So I've got an increase from 2020 to 2021 in wages. There's not as much in benefits that's going to increase just because this year kind of is ending below budget. So I was being kind of conservative about that. Plus, you just never know what's going to happen with the benefits with the person that you hire on. So they might have a family insurance plan. They might have a single. It's just hard to kind of tell those things. So I do my best with that. We've got the contract services. Really the biggest expenses are engineering fees. So we had a higher budget for 2020 with our engineering fees because I thought that we were going to spend more money towards our West Franklin Street bridge project. And it ended up getting deferred to 2021 for that final design work. So some of this money that was budgeted here is getting pushed. So that's really the biggest expense that we've got in our contract services is our engineering. And our bottom line is less than budgeted from 2020. Supplies and materials, it's less. As you'll notice, the big driver with that is our road salt. We are not going to have to take as much road salt in 2021, which is a big contributing factor here. So I had inserted a paving line in our contract services, and we ended up expending it out of capital. So you'll notice that there's a capital here, and this is where the actual expenditure happened. And with our supplemental appropriations, I'm fixing that. So this looks really weird, but it's something that I am correcting with our supplemental appropriations tonight by reallocating that. So when we look at our bottom line, again, we're set to go in the red about $40,000, but I'm not, I definitely don't think that will be the case. But that's the conservative approach, is that we would dip into reserves just slightly, leaving us with $174,000 fund balance.
What is that infrastructure and facilities, that line 5510?
So that is paving. That's,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry if you said that.
yep, it's paving. So
Okay.
it's also in our capital. So anything that's in this capital outlay area, all go over in our capital budget. So these numbers just feed straight from that. Anybody have any questions about streets? Okay. Some of these other funds are really small, really easy, one pagers, which is always great. So our state highway fund, again, this is 7.5% of our gasoline tax. That's where the revenue comes from. It's coming in less than budgeted in 2020. I took a conservative approach with 2021. And our state highway fund, we have very minimal expenses that come out of here. This middle line here should have been hidden. So sorry that that's kind of there sticking out with no numbers in it. So we've got electric. So we pay for the electric for the street lights. So that comes out of here. We've got just a little bit of money for contract services, which we haven't spent any of this year. And then we've got some supplies, signs, striping, and road salt. So our striping and road salt is split between streets, state highway, and our permissive tax fund. So everybody gets a little bit of a share because each of those funds cover or allow us to spend money on different roads. So state highway is obviously 725. So we've got some money allocated to that. I'll hit our permissive tax fund here in a minute, and that covers very specific streets. And then our streets fund covers everything else. So I'm looking at walking into 2021 with just short of 60,000, walking out of 2021, adding 10,000 reserves with a ending fund balance around 70,000. Any question about state highway? Okay. So fuel system fund. So this is our fuel system. Our fuel system is located up at Station 2. So we buy diesel and gasoline, and the buses are fueled from this, as well as all of our vehicles. So we get 3 cents a gallon from the city and the school district to maintain that fuel system. So this is a very small budget. We get little in, we spend very little out. So that's got a little bit of a balance, a fund balance, looking to add $100 or $50 to reserves next year. So $6,600. Again, that's a really small fund, not a whole lot of activity there. So we have our permissive tax budget, and I'm going to, well, I don't have the list on here, but we have the Greene County engineer designates certain streets within the city as permissive tax streets. So a portion of the licenses, like our registrations for motor vehicles, go to this fund. So we get some from a city levied tax, and we get some from a county levied tax. And like I said, the Greene County engineer is the one that designates these streets. So there used to be upwards of like, I don't know, 12 streets that were on this list. And I think we're down to like 5 now. So we can only spend this money on those 5 streets. But the good thing is that Little Sugar Creek is one of them. So we have our engineering fees, $50,000 here, which I still am trying to get the soil borings done this year for our Little Sugar Creek Road study to understand the whole length of that stretch. So I'm hopeful that we'll still get that accomplished this year, but that's, we'll see how that goes. So we're adding 57,000 in revenue and only spending 13 next year, just because, again, portion of our signs, striping, road salt, and road supplies comes out of here. So we've got a fund balance projected at the end of 2021 at 257,000. So Little Sugar Creek Road is one of those roads that we can use this on. So it's basically some of our arterial streets are classified as permissive tax. I really don't know what kind of formula they use in which to designate those, but that's permissive tax. Performance bond fund, this fund really isn't anything that we can necessarily control. We take in bonds for new construction. So it's basically an insurance policy. So we will take in a bond from a builder for either plan review and inspection or for erosion control bonds. So once they do the work that they need to do, we will refund them their bond. So, and we also end up sometimes having to pay out engineering fees for plan review and inspection. So some of that money that comes in will go right back out to those engineering fees. So that's pretty much the performance bond fund. It's an in and an out, and it's kind of hard to predict because you never know how many new houses are going to get built in any given year, especially given the what little space that we have left. Okay, we've got two more funds. This one, the waste collection fund, really simple because we bring in waste collection fees and we pay Rumpke. So it's a pretty easy in and out. You will see that we have a wage and compensation line as well as benefits line. Our utility billing clerk is partially allocated out of this fund just because it's one of the utilities that we bill for. So that just makes sense that a portion of this fund goes to fund that staff person that we have. So we look at our 2020 budget, our revenues, and where we think we're going to end the year, which this is really wild. It's within like $25, which never happens. So we did pretty good at figuring out how much would be collected this year. We did have a $1.50 per month rate increase in 2020. So that's why the number in 2020 is higher than what it was in 2019. So $1.50 a month rate increase, which brought the rate from $14 to $15.50 per month. So since there are no additional rate increases needed, I've got that we'll probably bring in the same amount of money next year. And then our services, I've got that budgeted at the exact same amount that we pay Rumpke for 2021 as what we did 2020, because obviously we're coming really close to that. So as you'll see, 2018 and 2019, we dipped into reserves a little bit. Then we stabilized it with the rate increase. So at the end of this year, we're going to add about 19,000 to reserves. And then next year we'll add about 9,500. So as long as we're in the black with that, we're good to go, but no rate increase for 2021. Any questions about waste? Okay, so water is a big one. And we're going to talk about first. So when we take a look at this, we're proposed to walk into 2021 cracking 3 million in reserves. So 3,044,740 if we end 2020 the way that I think that we will. Revenues, no rate increases or anything like that. So revenues were about 1.5 in 2020. Looking to end the year pretty close to that, just a little bit more than budgeted. And next year, again, another 1.5 is a pretty good estimate. I'm going to quickly scroll past everything just to look at the bottom line before we go back up into some of the detail. $1.5 million budget. We're looking to dip into reserves by 49,000. Again, this is a really balanced budget. I don't believe that we'll dip in. If you take a look at 2020, I thought we were going to be adding 39,000 to reserves, and we're projected to end the year with adding $285,000 to reserves. So pretty balanced budget. If 2021 ends the way that I think it's going to, we'll just be short, just about $5,000 short of 3 million in reserves. So the water fund is doing well. As it always has. So we've got our wages. Again, there's a lot of people paid out of water. A portion of almost all of our admin staff comes out of water because we all support that utility. And it's a big part of the city's operations. So we do have that set to increase just a little bit. And when we look at our benefits are just a little bit lower. Again, some changes in insurance designations and things like that. Across all the funds, you'll see workers' compensation. We have been getting refunds this year from the pandemic, and I think that there's one more coming, which should be received any day now. So workers' comp has given us some kickbacks. When we take a look at our contract services, these are all of the different things that come out of that. Our big expenses, utilities like electric, we've got a lot that comes out of that. We've got water system maintenance is another big one. And we did add 30,000 to that budget for 2021. And that's because Ryan wanted to, he allocated 17,500 for 2 well cleanings, $16,000 for a valve exerciser, and then routine supplies, about 25,000. So water system maintenance did see a bit of an increase to do some of the things that Ryan wants to do with maintenance. One of the other
on that electric power line,
Mhm.
line 5320,
Mhm.
is that like pumps or other equipment requests necessary to deliver water?
So that electric supports our entire water plant. All of our wells have electricity. So
Okay.
that's there might be some other accounts that are associated with that. Ryan, does that pretty much cover it, or is there anything else that would be a big draw on that?
No, that's pretty much it. We have pressure reducing valve sites. There's a lot of little, each water tower, which isn't a whole lot, but it all adds up.
Okay.
One of the other big expenses is our emergency dispatch that you'll see. So our water fund does pay part of our emergency dispatch, because if there are ever any main breaks or anything like that, people will use the emergency line to be able to get our staff notified of any kind of an issue that's occurring. So our water fund does pay a portion of that. This is a big unknown though, because our contract with Xenia ran out in September, and we're supposed to have a big group meeting because there are a number of different entities that use Xenia dispatch services. So I'm not sure what that contract is going to look like. So that's a big unknown right now. I had to stick a figure in there. I figure it's going to be slightly higher than what we've been paying, because that's just the trend. But where that really ends up, and this is going to affect police and fire budgets too, because I really don't know what's going to happen with that until after we get a contract. So that's a lot in contract services, and it's just set to be $19,000 more than budgeted in 2020. When we look at our supplies and materials, water system supplies and meters are really the big drivers of that. The rest of that are just smaller items for supplies, gasoline, diesel, things like that. So water system supplies are anything that would be needed to maintain that system, obviously, and then meters are their own separate line. So capital will go over. This number ties straight into our capital budget. So I'll go over exactly what is included in that here in a few minutes. And then we've got our other expenses. You're going to see that this has $20,000 jump just about. That's this number right here. So this water fees to Greene County, we have an agreement with Greene County. We're supposed to give them $1,300 for every connection at Redwood Living Development. And their billing is extremely erratic. So I stuck that in there not knowing when they might bill for it, because You can see that they billed for like 2 or 3 in 2018. They billed nothing in 19, nothing in 20. So I know that they're probably going to come calling for it at some point. So I've stuck it in there for 2021 just in case. And then we've got our principal on our bond, which is our building, city building rehab. This is the last payment right here, and then that'll go away. And then we've got 2 loans, Upper Hillside water main replacement, and then our water plant. So that's water. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay. So the missing bills for the water fees to Greene County, was that only Redwood?
Yes.
Not sure if this is relevant or not, but the township told me that they paid for those. So it might be why we didn't get billed.
The township paid for the water main that was put in down Clio Road, and we paid them back a portion of that. But
Yes.
each tap into those apartment buildings are the ones that she's referring to.
Okay,
So it's not Maine.
got it. Thank you.
I think, Melissa, don't we have a map of strictly Bellbrook and then a map of Greene County's territory that we have to pay these fees on?
Yes. Yes,
Any
our
new-
water service boundary was extended to include Redwood, and Greene County allowed our water service to be extended to those properties in exchange for a portion of our tap-in fees for that development.
That was an agreement I remember 3 or 4 years ago that we made with Greene County. It seemed like we really shouldn't have to pay them, but in the long run, it does give us that territory to service, which we can make some money on.
Well,
Yep.
if I recall, they couldn't service it very well.
That's the only reason they didn't.
Yeah, because
right.
their pressure isn't enough to get it there.
Right.
Yeah, they would have actually had, so their area or their service in that area, they buy water from Montgomery County. So it would be changing hands a few times.
Yeah.
And it was just easier this way, and that's really inexpensive if you ask me.
Yeah.
So
In
that
the long
figure,
run.
28.6 would be all of the tap-in fees for that entire development, because that development is fully built out right now, right, Ryan?
Correct.
Any other questions about water? Okay. We will hit capital again. I'm giving you guys everything, but I just want to focus on this first page, and then there is water as well. So our street fund, here's that 50,000 for paving. That's the only thing that will be coming out of streets this year. We do have some equipment that will come in future years, which are place marked on here. And usually, since streets and water use a lot of the same equipment, they are allocated out of both funds. So you'll see these same pieces of equipment show up when we look at water, and it will be the remaining portion of the expenses. So next year, 50,000 for paving out of streets. And administration, we have just a few computers that need to be upgraded next year because, as council remembers, 2018, 2019, and 2020, we put all of our workstations on a rotation. So we now have money earmarked every single year. So the first, second, and third years are a little bit heavier. That fourth year is just a little bit smaller. So that will be in the rotation every year. We have a very small fuel system upgrade kind of placeholder there for 2022. And then service out of the capital improvement fund is our annual street repair paving program. We also are allocating money each year for culvert relining. So Crescent Court will be happening in 2020. And then after that, we're allocating $50,000 as placeholders for future lining.
Crescent Court is in 2021.
Oh, 2021, that says 2020. I will make a note of that. Thank you for catching that.
Mhm.
We've got Franklin Street pedestrian improvements. That's that grant from MVRPC. It's moving a year closer in the budget line, which is great. So that'll happen in 2022, if not sooner. They've moved us up several times now. So I'm really excited to see that finally happen. It's been a long time coming. We also are allocating 4 years worth of money for downtown street lighting in 4 phases. So this would be decorative pedestrian level street lighting and underground electric for the lighting. So the thought was that we do a block at a time. So we might go down the east side of South Main and the south side of East Franklin and get those 2 done the first year. And then we might go the opposite corner and do the west side of North Main and the the west side of North Main and then the north side of West Franklin. So I will, I think that that's probably a good approach to take. That way it's not a huge expense up front and we can incrementally do it. The other thing that we really want to do is we want to start allocating money towards proper crosswalk installations downtown. So we've got that phased in 3 years, $25,000 a year for crosswalk improvements downtown.
Hey, Melissa, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're like 1 minute away from the council meeting start.
Oh, we are. My clock says 6:55 on this computer.
My phone says 6:59.
Yep, you're right. So the very last capital that we have to look at here is the water fund. Bledsoe Drive water tower needs painted next year, and that's been in the budget for a while. So that's coming up, and then we've just got some miscellaneous well-related projects and then some new meter reading software. So that's that $189,000 coming out of the water fund. So this year is kind of a light year with capital improvements, $640,000 across all funds. So our capital plan has 4,500 coming out, and we were going to transfer, I think it was 450 to that. I believe so.
So can we do this? I mean, there may be questions on this. Can we kind of revisit, circle around at our next meeting?
Yep, we sure can.
I mean, I don't know, maybe there aren't any questions, but I feel like it's kind of an important part of the budget process and people may want to weigh in on things.
Yep, and everybody can also reach out to me directly as well. If there's any specific questions that anybody might have, if they want anything, explained in more detail or anything like that. So, and we've got Ryan here too. So if anybody wants to reach out to Ryan to ask questions about any of his areas, he's available as well.
Okay, thank you, Melissa.
Ryan, I'd like to thank you for your good maintenance and taking care of business before it breaks. Appreciate that.
Pam, we ready to move into the public meeting? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the October 26th meeting of the Bellbrook City Council to order. Would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge of allegiance to the flag, United
of the
States
United
of
States
America,
of America, and
to the
to the
republic
republic
For which
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, and just
with
With
liberty
and
and
justice
and
justice.
justice
for all.
all.
Thank you. And could you please call the roll?
Mr. Hoke,
Here,
Mr. Havens, Dr. Van Veldhuizen,
he's muted. He nodded.
okay. Mr. Greenwood,
Here,
Mrs. Middlestetter,
Here,
and Deputy Mayor Edwards.
Here. Could I get a motion to excuse Mayor Schweller from tonight's meeting, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. First item is approval of the minutes of October 12th, 2020. Does anyone have any changes or corrections or anything they think need to be put into those minutes?
None, Deputy Mayor.
Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
Oh. Well,
All
I'll
in
second it. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Mhm.
No mayor announcements and special guests. Tonight we have 4 public hearing of ordinances. The first ordinance is ordinance 2020-7. Councilwoman Middlesetter.
Well, as soon as there it is. I had it up and then it went away. Okay. Ordinance 2020-7. An ordinance adopting new chapter 260 guidelines for members of boards, commissions, and committees of the City of Bellbrook Municipal Code. Whereas the Section 8 of the Charter for the City of Bellbrook states that all terms, number of members, procedures for appointment and replacement of members' duties and powers of boards and commissions thus created by the council shall be prescribed by ordinance. And whereas City Council for the City of Bellbrook has not previously adopted legislation establishing the procedures outlined in Section 8 of the Charter. And whereas procedures were developed by the Community Affairs Committee of Council and reviewed and approved at a meeting on September 22nd, 2020, and are attached hereto as Exhibit A. And whereas a new chapter 260 guidelines for members of boards, commissions, and committees shall be added to the City of Bellbrook Municipal Code. Now therefore, the City of Bellbrook hereby ordains Section 1 that the following chapter 260 guidelines for members of boards, commissions, and committees, and attached hereto as Exhibit A, is hereby adopted and incorporated into the City of Bellbrook Municipal Code. Section 2, it is hereby found and determined that all formal actions of this council concerning and relating to the adoption of this ordinance were adopted in an open meeting of this council, and that any and all deliberations of this council that resulted in such formal action were in meetings open to the public in compliance with all legal requirements, including but not limited to Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period provided by law. Okay, it's all yours, Melissa.
Okay, so this ordinance is basically fulfilling one of the requirements of our charter. So the charter states that there would be guidelines for members of boards, commissions, and committees. And so there were never any that were incorporated into the municipal code and into our ordinances. So this does just that. So it's adding a new chapter, and it is basically outlining all of the procedures that have been in place, but it is formalizing them. So this says that the charter gives council the authority to establish these things, and that council is designating the Community Affairs Committee of Council to be the recommending body, which it has been and has served in that capacity for a number of years now. And then it also goes through some expectations, which are very, very specific. You know, must come to meetings, must conduct yourself in a professional manner. They serve at the pleasure of council and shall comply with all of the various laws of the land. And it also calls out reappointment procedures, because there have never been reappointment procedures outlined. And it also talks about any removal. So again, that would go to council, and community affairs could recommend that. And so all formal actions would be made by motion by City Council after recommendation from Community Affairs. So that is the background on that ordinance.
Thank you, Melissa. Is there any questions on council? Okay, hearing or seeing none. This is a public hearing, so I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to make any comments or have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Can I get a motion on ordinance 2020-7?
I move that we adopt ordinance 2020-7.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Pam?
Is that Mr. Havens?
Yes.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Middlestetter to adopt ordinance 2020-7, an ordinance adopting new section 260 guidelines for members of boards, commissions, and committees to the Bellbrook Municipal Code. This was seconded by Mr. Havens. Mrs. Middlestetter?
Yes.
Mr. Havens?
Yes.
Mr. Hoke?
Yes.
Dr. Van Veldhuizen?
Yes.
Mr. Greenwood?
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Edwards?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Ordinance 2020-8, Dr. Van Veldhuizen.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ordinance number 2020-8, an ordinance amending section 18.20A, permitted signs, general of the Bellbrook zoning code. Whereas the city of Bellbrook has adopted chapter 18.20A, permitted signs, general, into the zoning ordinances for the city of Bellbrook. And whereas chapter 18.20A outlines standards for permitted signs within the city of Bellbrook. And whereas chapter 18.20A references in separate sections that signs related to an election shall be removed within 10 days following the conclusion of the event. And whereas it has been determined that such a regulation is unconstitutional. And whereas the city of Bellbrook desires to amend the zoning ordinances to ensure chapter 18.20A of the city of Bellbrook zoning code is compliant with state and federal law. Now, therefore, the city of Bellbrook hereby ordains section 1, that section 18.20A, permitted signs, general, of the city of Bellbrook zoning code, attached hereto as Exhibit A, be approved. It is hereby adopted and incorporated into the city of Bellbrook municipal code with deletions shown by brackets and strike through and additions shown by italics and underlined. Section 2, it is hereby found and determined that all formal actions of this council concerning and related to the adoption of this ordinance were adopted in an open meeting of this council, and that any and all deliberations of this council that resulted in such formal action were in meetings open to the public in compliance with all legal requirements, including, but not limited to section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period provided by law.
Thank you. Does anyone on council have any questions? Or Melissa, did you want to expand on it a little bit?
So really all this boils down to is it was found unconstitutional to put any kind of time limits on political signs. So there was a court case. I referenced the court case in my city manager update in case anybody wanted to take a look at that. So that very thing was referenced 4 times in the sign code. So it was just struck in those 4 places. And that's it.
Any questions from anybody?
None.
Okay, again, this is a public hearing, so I'd like to open the public hearing on ordinance 2020-8. Is anyone in the audience wanting to speak or comment on this? Hearing no one out there, I'll go ahead and close the public meeting or public hearing. Is there a motion on ordinance 2020-8?
I'll make a motion, sir.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
A motion was made by Dr. Van Veldhuizen to adopt ordinance 2020-8, an ordinance amending section 18.20A, permitted signs general of the Bellbrook zoning code. This was seconded by Mr. Greenwood. Dr. Van Veldhuizen,
Yes.
Mr. Greenwood,
Yes.
Mr. Hoke,
Yes.
Mr. Havens,
Yes.
Mrs. Middlestetter,
yes,
Deputy Mayor Edwards.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ordinance number 2020-9. Councilman Greenwood.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ordinance number 2020-9. An ordinance adopting the revised City of Bellbrook Personnel Manual. Whereas the manager of the City of Bellbrook is authorized to promulgate personnel rules and regulations for the employees of the City of Bellbrook pursuant to section 254.01 of the City of Bellbrook codified ordinances. And whereas the City of Bellbrook may adopt a personnel manual for the purpose of establishing certain policies and procedures for employees. And whereas the City of Bellbrook policies and whereas the City Council for the City of Bellbrook desires to adopt the revised personnel manual. Now therefore, the City of Bellbrook hereby ordains Section 1, that the revised personnel manual attached hereunto as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference, setting forth policies and procedures for employees of the City of Bellbrook is hereby adopted. Section 2, it is hereby found and determined that all formal actions of this council concerning and relating to the adoption of this ordinance were adopted in an open meeting of this council, and that any and all deliberations of this council that resulted in such formal action were to meetings open to the public in compliance with all legal requirements, including but not limited to section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period provided by law. And then the second page, Melissa, I'm sure you want to go over this, shows the changes and some of the things. Some of it was because of the new pay scale and things. So it's yours, Melissa.
Okay, so there were a number of changes to this personnel policy manual, and there was in the packet a cheat sheet, so to speak, which referenced the section, the title, the page, and the change of everything that was changed in the manual. So I categorize these in two separate ways, and because I color code everything, because that's how my brain operates. There are changes in kind of a light orange and a light blue color. So the light blue are the administrative policies that used to kind of live in a separate document, are now all combined in the personnel policy manual. I'm not sure what the thought was with separating them, but I think having everything in one document just makes much more sense. So everything that is in blue was a former administrative policy that has now been incorporated into the personnel policy manual. Everything that is in the orange were changes that were made that were outside of that incorporation of policies. So we had a change in professional development, which brought the language in line with our actual practice. So some language changes there to reflect how we actually have operated. There was a change to medical, dental, life, and vision insurance to add vision insurance. So we started adding vision insurance in 2020, and there was no reference to that in the manual, so that got incorporated. We made some changes to paid personal time and sick leave. So those two things went hand in hand. We used to award personal time if you didn't use sick time. And instead we removed that given the current situation with the pandemic. And even beyond that, it's just not a great practice to reward no use of sick leave. So instead we removed that and just added the personal days in exchange for that. We also added 2 weeks of paid leave for a mother or father around the birth of or adoption of a child in conjunction with FMLA. So that would be beyond their sick leave for a mother or a father. And then the last one is that we added a zero tolerance policy statement for discrimination and sexual harassment as well. So those were all of the major changes. And I know that Council Member Hoke had made a recommendation for a language change, which was also made. And I did not write down what page that was on, but
Section 6.2, I believe.
okay, it was section 6.2. So
I
he
think.
had pointed out it was the discrimination statement. So that language change was made that Councilmember Hoke had recommended. So hopefully this is the last time you have to see this giant document in the packet, since this is number 3 now.
Any questions from council?
It's always good to put that one to bed.
Yeah,
It wore out my printer.
sorry.
Okay, this is another public hearing. I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Can I get a motion on ordinance 2020-9, please?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to adopt ordinance number 2020-9.
Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
Okay,
A motion was made by Mr. Greenwood to adopt ordinance 2020-9, an ordinance adopting the revised City of Bellbrook Personnel Manual, and this was seconded by Mrs. Middlestetter. Mr. Greenwood,
Yes.
Mrs. Middlestetter,
Yes.
Mr. Hoke,
Yes.
Mr. Havens,
Yes.
Dr. Van Veldhuizen,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Edwards.
yes. Okay, ordinance 2020-10. Councilman Havens.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ordinance 2020-10, an ordinance amending ordinance 2020-5 to adjust the City of Bellbrook appropriations for 2020 and declaring an emergency. Whereas the City of Bellbrook adopted the 2020 annual budget based on the best information available at the time, and whereas the additional costs have or will occur in some line items, which requires the amendment of various appropriation levels. Now therefore, City of Bellbrook hereby ordains Section 1 that 2020 appropriation levels and several of funds listed below be amended as follows. It looks like the street fund, and I think that's all I see. I think there's going to be some explanation on this from Melissa. Section 2, this ordinance is presented as an emergency measure in order to ensure proper appropriation of funds within coronavirus relief fund guidelines outlined in House Bill 614, which must be encumbered prior to November 20th, 2020. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period provided by law.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm thoroughly confusing everybody because as you'll notice, there were 2 ordinances that looked almost identical in the packet. So one of them is the version that a motion was made at the last council meeting to introduce. In the meantime, what happened was it dawned on me that we were going to have to allocate what funds we weren't spending on supplies and projects to wages. So as you take a look at the ordinances, the format of the ordinance, we have to report personnel and other. So the first iteration of this had everything in other because I had not yet developed the wage lines. So since we're down to the end of appropriating this coronavirus relief money, I realized that I needed to create those lines and I needed to split that off in this ordinance. So the dollar amounts are exactly the same in the bottom line. So the change that was made is the first iteration of the ordinance had $324,955 in other expenses in the coronavirus relief fund. The second ordinance, the second version of the ordinance that's in the packet, the total revisions are still $324,955, but of that, $267,033 is going towards personnel services and $57,922 is going to other. So that is the change that was made. That's the big thing. So what we need to do is there will need to be a motion to accept the substitution. And then once the motion is made and carries to accept the substitution, then a motion can be made to adopt the ordinance. I got that from legal, so I know that that's right.
I
So
second that.
Okay.
That's how motions work. So you're good.
Does anyone else?
So
Go ahead.
there were just really some other little minor tweaks while I was in there. There was $2,500 in legislative personnel services that just needed to be adjusted before year end. Street fund, I'd moved some money around from that paving that I had talked about earlier. And then the performance bond fund, we had a few more refunds than what we had budgeted for originally, but the bulk of it's the coronavirus relief fund. And it is designated as an emergency because typically our ordinances go into effect 30 days after adoption. We don't have 30 days. We have to have the money expended by November 20th. So this gets us to that deadline legally.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing on this before we do any motions and seconds. Is there anyone out there that would like to comment on this? Okay, I'll close the public hearing, and can I get a motion on 2020-10, ordinance 2020-10?
don't we need a motion to adjust it first?
Yeah, you need the adjustment.
That's what I meant, the adjustment first, I'm sorry.
I'll go ahead and make that motion to adjust.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
All right, a motion was made to accept the substitutions for ordinance 2020-10 and ordinance amending ordinance 2020-5 to adjust the city of Bellbrook appropriations for 2020 and declaring an emergency. So seconded by Dr. Van Veldhuizen. Mr. Havens.
Yes.
Dr. Van Veldhuizen,
Yes.
Mr. Hoke,
Yes.
Mr. Greenwood,
Yes,
Mrs. Middlestetter,
Yes,
Deputy Mayor Edwards.
Yes.
All right.
So I guess now we need another motion on the actual ordinance, if I understand this correctly.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay.
A motion was made by Mr. Havens to accept the substituted ordinance 2020-10 and ordinance amending ordinance 2020-5 to adjust the city of Bellbrook appropriations for 2020 and declaring an emergency. This was seconded by Dr. Van Veldhuizen. Mr. Havens,
Yes.
Dr. Van Veldhuizen,
Yes.
Mr. Hoke,
Yes.
Mr. Greenwood,
yes,
Mrs. Middlestetter,
yes.
Deputy Mayor Edwards.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We have no introduction of ordinances tonight. We have no resolutions, but we do have a city manager's report. Melissa?
Okay, so just a few quick things. North Bellevue Drive is open. It was completed the week of October 12th and it's open and functional again. So big win. So it was supposed to be finished by October 31st and it was finished ahead of schedule, even though we had the delays with the funding and project agreement with the state in order to be able to get the money. So big thanks to Ryan and all of his crew that oversaw that project and made sure that everything down in that area happened, and everything was safe and got opened back up again. So this is a big win. So if you haven't drove down it, you should, because it's super nice. So there's still a little bit of restoration work to kind of happen, but it looks great. So I know that Forrest had reached out about, do we plan to put a walkway over it? We did not budget for that with this, but we did, the design did make it wide enough so that we could do that. So it's something that we can look at in the coming year to see what that would cost to add that to be able to at least have a safe crossing. So we're also going to look at putting a handrail, I think, in. So we're going to look at refining that a little bit for pedestrian improvements. So that'll come. We received a Greene County Municipal Grant at the beginning of the year. You guys might remember, for $30,000 from the Greene County Commissioners. So we had to have a report due to them by October 30th, telling them how we spent the money. And one of the things that we could spend the money on was infrastructure. And they like for us to be able to leverage that with grants. So I said, we used your $30,000 for our share of the North Bellevue Bridge collapse. So thank you for that. So that was an acceptable use of it. So 30,000 from the county, and our 325 from the state. So I think that we did pretty well with that financially, if I do say so myself. Coronavirus relief funds update. So all the funds have to be encumbered by November 20th, or you have to give it back to the county to be redistributed. We are going to spend all of it with the ordinance that was passed tonight. So I wanted to make sure that we've got everything dedicated. So I did include a one pager that is a coronavirus relief funds update. It went through all of the projects and the estimated cost of those projects. Some of those are not quite yet finished, just because we're still waiting on some contractors and supplies to yet to be delivered. But we spent, or are on track to spend, about $167,000 in projects. So we gave the grant to the Family Resource Center, which is now the Community Support Center, I think. It changed names, and I've got to switch that gear in my head. We spent about $27,000 on remote work capabilities, iPads, laptops, printers, things like that, to be able to do the things that we're doing right now. We made some upgrades for public meeting capability in council chambers. We have our city building public Wi-Fi. So our building is a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's good for a block. We are installing a couple benches on the grounds of the city building so that people can have a place to sit if they choose to use the free public Wi-Fi. And we bought some foggers, some sanitizing foggers, and upgraded some restroom facilities for touchless faucets, hand dryers, soap, things like that at the city building and the library. Library outdoor seating. You guys are going to have to go by and check it out. The benches and the picnic tables are set to be delivered. I believe it's next week, but we did pay for pavers to go underneath of them out at the library. So there's going to be 2 round picnic tables when you walk out of the library to the left on the lawn. And then there's going to be a bench on the right, and the pavers look really awesome. So it's going to look really great once those are in place. So hopefully next week those will be delivered, and then we can get them installed after our folks put them together. We are also upgrading actually, I think that the library doors are done. So those are now touchless doors to get into the library, which is really nice. And we're also doing that to the city building as well. Fire station is getting a new gear washer for sanitation of their gear. And then we had a big purchase of police and fire safety gear, breathing apparatuses, face shields, things like that they needed. Some of those purchases were really needed, and we just never had budgeted for them, was what the fire chief was telling me. So we were able to get a lot done. That's not just money that was spent to just be spent, but they were actually going towards some projects that will benefit our police and fire, as well as our community at large, in terms of a lot of the touchless facilities. So we had spent about just short of $11,000 on the Family First Coronavirus it's the Family First Act. So it was what was offering 2 weeks of leave for anybody that met a number of different requirements. We had about $11,000 in staff costs of different staff in different departments that were off as a result of that. And that's going to leave a remaining balance of the 266,732 to be allocated towards wages. So we're going to put 139 of that towards police and 127 of that towards fire. So that is our $445,000 spent in a whirlwind. It's a very interesting concept to be told to spend a whole lot of money in a very little period of time versus shaving it in a very small period of time. So Ryan, I've really got to give him a lot of credit because his folks have been installing this. He's been ordering all of it. His folks have been installing all of this stuff. He's coordinated all of the contractors to get these things done. I mean, he's been working around the clock just to get this done because we've got to get it all done so quickly. So it's nice that we can finally say that we will have the money spent and we'll have a little breathing room. So I'm really glad that we've kind of made that happen. So that's it for my my update.
Does anyone have any questions for our city manager?
I have had several people ask me and email me asking about guardrails. And I think I had emailed you about that on the bridge. And I know we're not putting them in, but the safety considerations were that the berm is going to be wide enough that guardrails aren't necessary.
Yes. So when they engineered the design for that, there are all kinds of standards that, you know, if you've got this much room, then you have to have this. If you have this much room, then you don't have to have this. And that was one of those things where there was enough room for correction with the width of those berms that we did not have to put guardrails in. But I do think that putting some walkway over, just because, you know, that connects those two neighborhoods, and with the school being right there and many more kids walking, I think that it's a good idea to put some handrails on both sides and sidewalk to get across. So we'll have to look at that.
One of my contacts said very few children actually walk South Linda to go to school, that they're driven because they're little.
Sidewalks in South Linda, is there?
I'm sorry, not South Linda, North
Bellevue.
Bellevue.
There's no sidewalks there anyway, so you
No,
can
there are no. When these plaques were built, the idea was that you wanted to be rural and have not a city look, so they didn't put sidewalks in.
So I guess guardrails would be not more for pedestrian traffic, but for vehicles.
For vehicle, because there's a bridge and, you know, the creek and.
Was there guardrails on the last bridge? I don't remember.
It was much more narrow. Yes,
Yeah.
there was.
As a reference point for you guys, Streamview, there are two similar designs. It doesn't seem like a good idea on the surface, but it's been there for 20 years. Haven't seen any problem. Sidewalk goes right by it. We don't get a lot of pedestrian traffic. I don't know if that one will, but it hasn't been a problem, shockingly.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, look at Bellbrook. We are famous for keeping our streets awesomely clean. So I don't see a problem. But I did have several people ask me about it. So I thought it would be a good idea to expand on the explanation a little bit at this meeting.
Good idea to refer them to Streamview just so they can see that we have something like that already in operation.
Yeah.
I like that awesomely clean, Elaine.
Put that in the minutes, Pam.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for our city manager? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to old business, in which there's none. New business, which there's none. And so we'll go to committee reports. Service.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of things. Leaves, please keep them out of the street. We don't have a service that collects them. Reason we don't, it's cheaper for you to do your own. drain, if you see any drains in your area, uncover them with, if they're full of leaves. It helps us out. I know the service department does that regularly. But this time of year, there's exceptional amount of leaves come down. The other thing, few people kind of think that we're part of Greene County sewer system, but we're not. We're two different entities. The only thing that the sewer system has to do with is they take our water totals, send them to Greene County, and that's how they bill. But we don't have anything to do with any increases of fees or anything with the sanitary system. And our water system, we haven't had an increase. I don't know how many years. It's been a long time. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Safety.
Yeah, the only thing with respect to safety is related to COVID, just from the fire chief. They are actively taking all measures possible, social distancing, wearing masks and goggles, limit exposure. They have not seen any increase in transport numbers, even though there are just higher numbers. So nothing from the fire. With respect to police, they are taking proactive measures, cleaning cruisers on every shift, deep cleans once a month. They are not holding roll calls in a classic sense to avoid contact. They wearing masks, obviously, when necessary, and continue to monitor temperatures before shifts. So all's well from fire and police. No other updates than that. Thank you.
Thanks, TJ. Finance and audit, included in your packet tonight is the third quarter financial update. I hope you've all had a chance to look at it. They look in pretty good shape. I don't know, Melissa, if you have anything you want to expand on it. We'll need a motion to accept these after talking about them.
So the only thing that I would say is that revenues are up and expenses are tracking. So there's nothing really unusual. There's also a capital project update. Most of our capital projects are wrapping up. There's a few things that have just been delayed just because of, the current world events. So we're trying to get everything done by the end of the year. So we're hopeful, but finances look good. So we went over that quite a bit already at the work session. So looking good at getting close to year end. So
Anybody have any questions on the third quarter financial update?
Just the one question. I mean, it's not that big of an amount, but what was the reason for the 69% decrease on tap-in fees? I mean, it's like 120,000.
Yeah, so we had a lot of tap-in fees that came from Redwood in 2019, in 2019. So that was a full development that was built and we received all those revenues. So that's why that was really heavily loaded.
Okay, could I get a motion to accept the third quarter financial update, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
A motion was made by Mrs. Middlestetter to accept the third quarter financials for the city of Bellbrook. This was seconded by Mr. Hoke. Mrs. Middlestetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hoke?
Yes.
Mr. Havens?
Yes.
Dr. Van Veldhuizen? Mr. Greenwood?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Edwards?
Yes. Okay, community affairs.
Okay, just remind people that Saturday night is Beggars Night. People just need to use their common sense and do what they think is best to keep themselves and their families safe. If you don't want to participate in the traditional Beggars Night, turn your porch light off. We have to leave that up to individual families. We don't regulate it other than saying that is the same, it's the same night in all the surrounding communities. That's the only thing we have to do with it. And I would like to say something for community wellness and health of our environment. I see so many bags of leaves going out, and I say this every year. just chop them up and throw them in a pile, or chop them up and let them go back into the lawn. It's so much better for the environment, and instead of putting them in the landfill. It takes 2 or 3 days for them to disintegrate. So there's lots more and more of that being talked about these days, about taking care of, reducing the loads that go into the landfills, and treating our soil better by replenishing it with organic materials. The easiest way in the world to do it. Just run your lawnmower over it. So that's my 2 cents. That's it.
Thank you. Clerk's update. I didn't steal your thunder this time, Pam.
No. How about that? So upcoming items to be aware of. We will start again at 6 p.m. for the next meeting on November 9th. It'll be the second work session on the 2021 budget, and it will be going over the police, fire, and capital improvements. So got that to look forward to. On November 23rd, we're going to also have a work session that will start at 6 p.m. and that will be a follow-up that will be to discuss the CICs and the fire station consolidation project. So that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. Legislative items coming in the future. We'll have the introduction to the budget ordinance and then the public hearing on the budget ordinance. Some items that are headed your way from the planning board are a vacancy registration ordinance and an update to Article 14 and 1820B, which is sign regulations. So, and then there'll always be other items coming in the future. So, but trying to give you a little bit of what's coming soon. So,
Thank you, Pam. Open discussion, Councilman Greenwood.
I just like to make a comment. See a lot of people out and about wearing masks, and I think maybe we're kind of getting used to this situation. I appreciate people taking personal responsibility and kind of complying with a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's affected everybody. It's somewhat aggravating, but I kind of look at it like it's a timeout until we get a handle on it. So a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, but bear with the time and it'll get better. Thanks.
Thanks. Councilwoman Middlestetter.
I don't have anything further to add to what's already been said.
Okay. Councilman Hoke.
Yeah, just want to continue. Congratulations to the Bellbrook High School football team. Still going on in the state tournament. And also I want to extend a thank you to We Eagle Sports. They faced a lot of adversity this year in trying to proceed with the coronavirus. They also had a number of restrictions placed on them for fundraising because a lot of businesses that would normally cooperate. So a lot of community members pulled together to make this happen for a number of kids in our community. So thank you.
Thanks. Councilman Havens.
Just a couple things. We have a new police little free library thanks to Alex Fabric. It is better than every other one in the past because it has a blue flashing light on the top. So thanks, Alex. It looks great. And also big congrats to Coach Jenkins and the Bellbrook football team. You guys are doing great. Keep up the good work. I'm very, very proud of you guys. Also, big thanks to Bellbrook Soccer Association for bringing that big tournament to the community. I could see the frustrations on some people's eyes as they drove around Saturday and Sunday, but we always appreciate the opportunity to host that and get some more people visiting our businesses downtown. So, and lastly, definitely, that's it. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Dr. Van Veldhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to say I got a chance to spend a few hours with a couple of Ryan's guys. Turned out to be a very exciting day. We were just replacing a fire hydrant. Well, I was watching them replace the fire hydrant that had been knocked over. And in the middle of that, just about when it was going to get interesting, there was a water main break outside of town. So I stopped by to see them on the way into work and then also on the way back. And just impressive to talk to them. Interesting to see how that work was done. But just their professionalism, their work, and doing both those in a day. I was really struck by that water main break, that at the end of the night, there's just kind of a smooth surface to drive on, kind of a hole in the macadam. It didn't indicate at all how big the hole was underneath that they'd had to dig and what they'd had to do down there to get it all fixed. So I know we've all talked about Ryan and his guys before, but again, it was a pleasure to talk to them. They taught me quite a bit, and it was just good to see him at work. Thanks, sir. That's it.
Thank you. I don't have anything else to add, so I guess I'll open this up to public comment. I don't know, Pam, if there's anyone in our queue that has anything they'd like to talk about.
Yes, we do have a person who would like to talk, so I'm going to try and get her set up here. Here she comes, I think. Robin, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Robin. If you could give me your name and address, and if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, that would be great. Thank you.
I sure can. Thank you. I'm glad my picture's not up there. Robin Logsden at 2223 Lakeman Drive, and that's Bellbrook. What I wanted to mention, and I related to Pam on the last meeting that I wasn't able to access, and Pam helped me with that. I just wanted to be another voice about the obscene banner on Belmead, which I know everybody's aware of. And I spoke with the police department and a couple members, including Captain Carmen, and then Pam also relayed what the attorney said. Steve McHugh, he happened to be my mother's attorney when she was living. So I know he's such a reputable voice in the community and other places. So I get that. I wanted to be a voice. And if there's anything that we can do, that's all.
Thank you. I don't know from the standpoint, I don't know enough about it to know what we can and can do, but I think you always run into freedom of speech issues with banners and signs on private property. But it doesn't help our community when things like that are put out. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
Is there anyone else, Pam?
You're on mute, Pam.
You're on mute.
There is another person who has not said if they want to speak, and they haven't raised their hand. So
Okay.
I'm guessing not.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, at this time, I would like to get a motion to head into executive session to discuss negotiations related to our public employees' compensation and other terms. After we get out of executive session, there'll be no other further business discussed. So can I get a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you. We'll head into executive session.
Thank you. And if you'll give me just like a minute and a half,
That's fine.
the technical stuff.
Actually, a 5-minute break might be nice.
This is going to be really quick.